Okay. Oh shit. Oh fuck, these don't fit. Hi, I'm Audie. I have autism and I don't know a lot, but I do read a lot. So let's talk about it. This is everything I read in June. Alright, so listen. I know that the people who normally make these videos typically get all their books at the end of the month and they sit down and they talk about them all at once. That's standard format. However, I tried that. I did that for my May wrap up, and guess who didn't have fun? This guy. So I decided to do something never been done before, never been seen, totally original, all new. I just popped a squat right here whenever I finished a book or a couple of books, and I talked about it so that you could get my opinions hot off the page. And hey, it'll be fun for you because you can see how varied my wardrobe isn't. So I'm going to send you back to the beginning of the month when I started reading, and once past me stops talking through their hat to hear their head roar, we'll reconvene here for final thoughts and some tier ranking. So I'll see ya in a bit. Hi, I finished a book. Cold Clay by Juneau Black. This is the second book in the Shady Hollow mystery series, which is a series of cozy murder mysteries that are set in a world where humans don't exist, and it's just a bunch of anthropomorphized animals. I really like this series. They're little guys in the forest. Also, the crow in this town, she owns a bookshop. This series follows Vera Fox. She's the ace reporter for the newspaper in town, and she just happens to find out about all these murders or is witness to them. She's got to do her part to solve them. The constable in this town, he's kind of a moron. He definitely needs all the help he can get, and Vera is on the case. This case focuses on Joe the Moose because he is accused of committing murder. And Vera's like, no, that's slanderous. And so she figures it out while scurrying along on her little paws. I love this series. They don't bring the best mysteries. Like in this one specifically, the murderer was very obvious, but it was the why and the how that were really the mysterious part. But I just come here to read these to have a good, cozy time. They're just a great little something. I want to live in Shady Hollow. I truly do. Also, hello, the covers are gorgeous. And every cover has little clues to the mystery. As you read, you understand why all these different elements are on the front of the book. And it's delightful. It's like an I Spy. These books are just sweet. I turn to them whenever I need a little bit of a break, a little bit of a palate cleanser. They're so cute. They're just so cozy. I want to make sure that everybody knows that I know that reading is subjective. I know that. That's one of the beautiful things about reading. But sometimes I am just confounded by how badly a book can miss the mark. A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is, it markets itself as a gothic horror. Southern hospitality to die for. That's what it says it is. And I guess you could argue that this is a deconstructed gothic horror. What's gothic about this? Technically we're in the South, even though we're in a cookie cutter cul-de-sac with ecru walls. Ooh. Somebody is said to be racist. It's hot. And that's it. This book is scary if you're scared of ladybugs and rose bushes. Yeah. Sure. This is about our main woman, Sam. I'm not good with names, in case you haven't figured that out. Anyway, Sam is an archaeological entomologist. Niche. She goes home to North Carolina to stay with her mom because her brother has told her lately that mom's getting weird. She's like losing weight and kind of acting suspicious. And so she goes home to stay with her mom, and not a lot happens. This book is divided into days, and when I tell you that every single day we are just hanging out with Sam on the couch as she drinks boxed wine and eats pizza, and as she works on labeling image files with insect names for a project for the university that she works for. That's the majority of what we do in this book. It's boring. We talk so much about entomology, which, look, I love a niche subject in a book. I do. It's fun, but it has to be integrated into the story appropriately. And like, why was she an archaeological entomologist? Like, what did that bring to the story? Not much, I will tell you that. She just notices that there's no bugs in her mom's rose garden. And there's at one point a swarm of bugs. But anybody could have noticed those things. Her education had like nothing to do with what was happening. It was so unnecessarily detailed throughout these pages that it was frustrating. Also, she's very much the funny fat girl. And like, I love fat representation, and that was totally done well in this book. Well, it was done fine. It was fine. She was fat and you knew it. But like, her humor was just grating. It was like, I know just like reading is subjective, humor is also subjective. And let me tell you, I have a problem with the humor that I was subjected to in this book. At one point she finds a photo of her great-grandfather, and she's like, oh, that guy looks like Rasputin. Grandpa Rasputin. Throughout the rest of the book. And I know that's not a great example of the kind of humor I'm talking about, but like, it bothered me. Oh! Here's proof that this is gothic. She goes to a Ponsboro coffee shop. It says, the barista was a woman so goth that she probably bled black mascara. There's also this running bit throughout this book where like her phone can't connect to the Wi-Fi. My phone informed me that it was absolutely talking to the internet. It was happy to talk to the internet. It loved talking to the internet. Then as soon as I tried to check my email, it told me it had never heard of the internet and wasn't entirely sure it existed. At one point, she's standing outside talking to a ladybug. Whatever. You know, we all talk to stuff that can't understand us. There should be a lot more of you, I said, but there's nothing for you to eat. Or, if not you, at least, you know, 2-spotted, 9-spotted, something. Parentheses. Yes, I was standing here talking to a ladybug. I do that. Don't judge me. Like, girly pop, I wasn't judging you until you said that. And now I'm judging you a lot. And it's just like, all right, I know every day that we're gonna sit on the couch and drink wine and eat pizza and Google symptoms and label bug pictures and just be like, I hate the colors of the walls. Why is my mom being quiet? Like, it... I swear to you, nothing interesting happens until the last 40 pages of this book. That's when, like, the horror starts, at least in my opinion. But the last 40 pages, are you kidding? Like, it's too late. This book was a waste of time. All right, so at this point, we've had a cozy murder mystery. We've had a horror. Now we have a romance. The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson. This is a werewolf shifter romance, quote unquote. Honestly, this is really just a doctor romance with two doctors that really like the way that each other smells. This was boring. As my roommate put it, because she also read this separately, it was too clean. And I agree with that, because there was nothing beastie about this. This is about our doctor guy, Noah. He's a werewolf alpha, and in this world, there's a lot of stigmatization about alpha werewolves. And if they don't have a mate, they're seen as dangerous liabilities. And he's been lying about his alpha status to the hospital that he works at, but he's been found out. Got it? And then we have our nurse, Mackenzie. And her grandmother really wants her to settle down with a nice guy and give her grandchildren. And she's like, no, grandmother, I don't like dating because my parents' marriage ended poorly. Anyway, it's fake mate. It is the fake mate, but it's fake dating. So they fake date each other so that the hospital board thinks that he's not a liability because he's mated to her, and all his sexual frustration and energy goes into her, and everything's cool. And you know, they have sex. And can I be so honest with you right now? The sex was vanilla and boring. Sure, there was a good amount of it, but like, I didn't care. And this was fine up until about 250 pages, and then it suddenly got just so repetitive and boring. It got to the point where it was like, oh no, does he like me? Do I like him? No, that can't possibly be. Oh no, do I like her? Does she like me? No, that can't possibly be, even though it's really clear that we do like each other, but like, oh no, it's not possible because who would love me? And like, blah, blah, blah. It just wasn't interesting. Constantly talking about how much he's frowning, constantly talking about how broad his shoulders are and how his big, massive body covers her teeny, tiny little body. Non-stop. Again, it was like fine up until 250 pages, and then it just got so repetitive and boring, and like I just didn't care. The characters weren't interesting, the side characters weren't interesting. Also, we totally lost the plot with her having to like pull one over on her grandmother, because it's like he goes to one dinner with her grandmother and then we just stop talking about the grandma. And the whole book is basically just focused on him not getting in trouble with the hospital board, and like, okay. And then of course there's a third act breakup, which is just like so stupid and pointless. It's literally pointless. In conclusion, Boring sex, uninteresting characters, so much talking about how they love the way that the other one smells. So if that's your thing, I really like how in my last wrap up for May, I specifically said I was not a romance girly. And that brings us to the next book that I finished this month. Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I will say that I think this is wrongly marketed as a romance. This is not romantic, all right? This is not a love story. This is a story of a bunch of rich people and their drama and their obsession with each other. It was like reading reality TV of the stupidest, messiest people you've ever heard of. The story focuses on Magnolia. The story focuses on Magnolia and BJ. And they also have like a friend group situation because they all went to boarding school together and like have known each other forever, and they fight and they do drugs and they hook up and rinse and repeat for like 420 pages. It was just literally every chapter is like drama, drama, drama. Like, oh my god. We have dead siblings, we have drug overdoses, we have cheating, we have so much swapping of spit amongst this group of people. I do wish that the boys in the friend group were more distinct. I knew this about myself, but I am such a sucker for burly boys loving bitchy girls as brothers. It warms my ice cold little heart. That was a definite theme in this because Magnolia calls the boys her boys, and there's so much talk about how Magnolia and BJ, they are each other's soulmates, but it all got ruined and la-di-da-di-da. He's just the boy that she grew up being with, and so their lives are really intertwined in ways that can never be undone, and in ways that has shaped her as a person and also shaped him as a person. And so that's why they can't get over each other, why they keep circling each other and coming back to this toxic mess of their lives together. I don't know, I just like, especially in the beginning, how BJ and Magnolia are portrayed and how their relationship is portrayed, because they're still so involved with each other, but not in a romantic way, even though they want to. And so there's a lot of like talk about how they're touching without touching, or like they find ways of interacting that give them a sense of closeness without actually having real intimacy. And there's also really nice portrayals of very small things that only happen in relationships where you've spent a lot of time and space together. I completely understand why some people would hate this. I get it. The themes are very repetitive. One could also argue that this was very overwritten. And I see that. I hear you. But also, that didn't bother me because I liked the style. This is essentially 420 pages of the author figuring out different ways of how she can write I Can't Quit You. But I have to say that I quite liked how she did that. I was slurping up that toxic soup. Anyway, yeah, this really did it for me. I got a kick out of this. More than I thought I would, honestly. I'm on my Sodergren shit again. I read his newest release, Rotten Tommy. Cover art by Trevor Henderson. Duh. This is Sodergren number 3 for me. And whoa boy. Let me ask you something. Do you think that there can be too much representation in a book? Like too much accurate representation to the point where it's just painful to see so much of yourself within the pages of a book, because that's how I felt here. I heard one person say that there was autistic representation in this book, and not only is there representation, but it's like a huge part of the story. It's like the backbone of the story is our main character, Becky's autism. She is 44 years old, late in life diagnosed autistic. Hello? She's married to a nasty, nasty man, which, if you read Sodergren, you know when there's a nasty man, there's an even nastier genital ripping scene coming up. And let me tell you, there was one, and it was hilariously exquisite. Anyway, do you want to know what this book is about? Maybe I should tell you. How do I explain this book? Becky finds 3 videotapes that have been hidden in her wall when she's doing renovations, and she believes that these videotapes hold the missing pieces to her mother's disappearance 40 years ago. I loved it because the videotapes that Becky finds in her wall, they're of this really creepy, eerie kids TV show. And then if you watch You Get Got by Sir Tommy himself. And it is in the best way. It was satisfyingly weird. Sodergren's whole thing is that he writes the book equivalent of B horror movies. And so you've got the slasher horror monster fun, right? But what I loved about this and what I connected to the most, obviously, was Becky as our main character and her autism and her journey with her autism and like just the reality of being a non-man diagnosed with autism late in life and what that looks like and what that does to your relationships and how people see you differently after you get diagnosed and how people often question your diagnosis and infantilize you and like just all the shit that comes with being late diagnosed autistic is represented so well in this that I kind of couldn't believe it because it was so spot on that it hurt. Like I kept having to put this book down and just digest. As a late diagnosed autistic person, I watched my greatest fears play out in this book and in Becky's life. And I have just never read representation like this, much less in a horror book. Also, as somebody who reads with reading buddies, aka stuffed friends, there's also representation of that in this book. Becky has her stuffed friend, he's a stuffed penguin named Grumpus. And Grumpus really does play a role in this book, and I died. Grumpus is my favorite character now of the year. And of course, everything is executed well, and I always appreciate that so much about Sodergren's work is that this book is not very long, but he can execute his stories so well in such a short amount of time that I'm like blown away by it every time. His books, to me at least, are the perfect length. They're not too long, they're not drawn out. They just get right to it, but they also give you enough balance of backstory and character work and horror that it just, oh, it's delicious. They're always so good. This is what I'm after when I look for self-published work. It is good. It's delightfully bizarre. It's gory. There is an opening scene of gore involving an eyeball that had me going, bro, I'm telling you, get on this one. It's funny because Rotten Tommy is very specifically about an autistic main character, and the next book I picked up after that, there's some autistic traits going on, but it's not explicitly stated. Woman Eating by Kohda. Now this is a coming of age story, but make it vampires. This book was good. This book uses vampirism to explore so many different subjects. I can't even list all the topics, but some of them are the traits that we inherit from our parents and how they make us who we are, the subtle psychological and emotional effects of colonization and how they can manifest in relationships. There's a lot of representation of the struggle of cultural assimilation. We even touch on disordered eating. We talk about death. There's depression representation in here. It offers a lens of observation outside of, but near enough to our own humanity, through which you can come to your own conclusions about all of the subjects that this book brushes up against. Throughout this story, you really do feel lost along with the main character. She's alone physically for the first time in her life, and she has to figure out how to reconcile that with the loneliness she's lived in for her whole existence, despite always living with, or in some cases, well, in most cases, because of living alongside her mother. She's also trying to navigate this lack of complete or permanent connection with others, and how her humanity and vampirism both dictate how she deals with that. As I was reading this, I get lost in the details and be like, wait, where are we? What is this story? Like, what is happening? How does this connect? But then I had to step back and look at the whole picture for what it was, which is truly just, even for me in my 30s, a very relatable and moving depiction of so many things, including toxic, abusive relationships with your parents, this feeling of loneliness and disconnect from your heritage, and just that feeling like there's a monstrosity inherently within you, and how do you deal with that when you want to be a good person but you feel like everything in you is pulling you to be this other thing, this other beastly thing. Vampire and monster stories are the perfect medium for exploring these things, because they often look at the ugliness or the monstrosities of humanity by actually physically being monsters. So I think this was great. I thought it was beautiful. It brought up so many important topics in such a lovely way. And we never got too far away from the fact that this is a vampire story. Nothing ever felt totally human, even though you could see yourself in these subjects and the things that our character would think or do. But it always came back to her being a monstrosity. It balanced really well between reality and fantasy in that way. It made you comfortable enough to be able to identify with her in the mundane things, that you start seeing yourself also in the ugly, unappealing things within her. I will say there's not necessarily much of a story, this is not a plot book. This is an examination of this small moment in this being's life. And this moment in her life is filled with desperation and confusion and hunger. Most of all, hunger for understanding herself and what she is and what she's capable of being, despite her mother's voice in her head telling her that she's unworthy of life. She has to figure out so much, and yeah, it's a coming of age story, and I typically don't enjoy those stories because I'm older and they're just not my thing. And even though our character is young in this, she's also ageless because she's a vampire. And these things that she grapples with are things that people deal with for their entire lives. So it still felt relatable in a lot of aspects to me. I mean, as much as I can relate to a half Malaysian, half Japanese, a vampire. But I still think that's wonderful, that even though I'm white, I could still connect with and understand that these different parts of her, none of them are fully realized, and how she wants them to be, and her struggle to embrace who she is in all aspects of her existence. Let me see if I can find a quote. Like, this is kind of the running theme throughout this book, is this quote right here. I'm not really sure what I am anymore, though. Whether I'm a monster or whether I'm just a woman, or both. I told myself I would save this book, this reading experience, until I reached a point where I really just needed to zone out and let the world roll over my brain like water off a duck's back. That moment came a little sooner than I thought it would, so. I read Daisy Haites by Jessa Hastings. Now this is the book that comes after Magnolia. Magnolia Parks is supposed to be right here. My roommate stole it. So, just pretend she's sitting right there. This book follows different characters in Magnolia Parks. It follows somebody from the friend group, and then his love interest. And I ate this up. I ate it. I slurped it. I sipped it. I savored it. Who am I? I loved my time here. This one, I think is, I won't say very different, but it is different than Magnolia Parks. Magnolia Parks, again, was kind of overwritten. Again, that didn't bother me. This one had a different tone. It had more of a story. It had more interesting characters, in my opinion. Because this book follows, like, the crime lords of London. Yeah, there was still that toxic, kind of obsessive love that I enjoy just in general in my books. And the really fun thing about this book is that you get to see scenes that you read in Magnolia Parks from a different perspective. So, like, you understand the context of why they happened. And I really enjoyed that part of it. And even though I got context, I still didn't agree with what happened, but at least I understood. And the writing is much more simple. You still get a dose of those prose every once in a while, and I think that they hit a lot better in this when they do come, because the writing isn't oversaturated with them. There was a lot more moments in this that I thought were very tender and like meaningful and well done. I've never felt so much and been so impacted by the imagery of a washing machine before in my life. That was genuinely one of my favorite parts about this. Also, IKEA. In Magnolia Parks, I didn't get emotional. I was just kind of like, more drama. In this, there were actual scenes where I felt something in my cold, dead, romance-hating heart. I was shocked. But this really did it for me. I liked this even more than Magnolia Parks. And I'm very interested to see what happens in the next Daisy Haites books, because this ended, I think, perfectly. When I say that a romance book ends perfectly, it usually means something wildly different than most romance readers mean. And that's all I'll say about that. Hi, I hope you're not a fan of my videos, because I will not be reading anymore. Do you want to know why? I guess I should tell you what this book is about. Nora and her sister Libby have been drifting apart lately, and so they go on a vacation to a small town that happens to be the setting of a best-selling book from one of Nora's clients, because she is a book agent. There, she sees Charlie Humpst. She had a disastrous professional meeting with 2 years prior to this. Libby has a checklist of small town romance tropes that she wants Nora to live in real life for reasons unknown. And then Nora and Charlie like hang out, and well, it's a romance, so you can probably put together the rest. What a one-note, dull, watered-down, boring book. I didn't give two shits about anybody in this book. I I don't, because it's not well executed. There was way too much going on in this book, and yet at the same time, absolutely nothing was happening. There was no tension. Our characters were into each other from the get-go, even though we're supposed to believe that they're each other's work nemesis. And why? They don't work together. They're not co-workers. They just happen to work in the same industry. They had one bad meeting 2 years ago. It was the first time they ever met. It was the last time they ever spoke, until they run into each other in this small town where he grew up and she is on vacation with her sister. And so from that one bad meeting 2 years ago, Nora thinks of Charlie as her nemesis, and yet she goes directly into flirting with him as soon as she sees him. There's no will they, won't they. It is just from the get-go, oh, they're into each other. Like, they may be into each other, but I'm not into them. It was a book of cliches, and it was desperately trying not to be a book of cliches. But, like, you are what you are, baby. We also got into a book within a book, which was unnecessary and strange. They're like editing a book together, and we get snippets of that book, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? What? There is no reason for this story. There are no stakes or anything until 163 pages into this book. And yet, as soon as we get those stakes, nothing is done with them. And it's just like, why are we here? And what are we doing? And out of everything we could be doing, why are we doing this? This book was almost 400 pages of treading water. Because like I said, there's no tension, there's no longing, there's no angst, there's no fighting, there's nothing between them. They just like each other, and then they kind of fool around, and then they stop, and then eventually they hook up 300 pages into the book. And by that point, nobody cares. They've already felt each other up several times. They've already made out several times. 300 pages in, we get an explicit scene, and it's like, first of all, boring. Second of all, why do we care? I don't care. You could have been doing this all along. There's literally no reason for you to not have been doing this all along. This is just a book of made up reasons why these people who are super into each other can't date. They can. And I got so irritated with the tragic dead parent backstory. It's lazy, all right? Authors of all genres use it way too much to give their characters depth, emotional depth, or whatever, but it doesn't work here. Nora doesn't have emotional depth. Libby, her sister, doesn't have emotional depth. Charlie doesn't have emotional depth. These characters are one note, and they all sound the same. Like, I felt no connection to these characters, and I had no reason to feel connection to them. Even when we get these exposition dumps about these characters' backgrounds, they're just that. They're just dumped on us, and we're not given actually moments to live in and feel through. We're just given information about their tragic backstories, and we're expected to give a shit. And I'm like, I don't. Sorry. It was a slog to get through this. You're this long for what? For no goddamn reason. It's like reading the most boring Hallmark movie that just has way too many elements going on that it doesn't know how to handle. We're going on a sister vacation. We're trying to check off all of these romance novel tropes to experience in real life. We are establishing a working relationship with the man we have the hots for so that we can edit a book together. We are talking about the book that we're editing. We're reading excerpts from that book. We are trying to save a small town business and put on a ball. Also, my sister is pregnant and having marriage problems. You know what I mean? Y'all, after that shit show of a romance, I needed a win. Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I have to say, I think this is the best heterosexual romance that I have read to date. I haven't read a ton of them, but out of the ones I have read, this is the best. This book, if you don't know, is a contemporary romance about a big whiz, a doctor lady who falls in love with a small town mayor who happens to be 10 years younger than her. The struggle that they go through to try and figure out how to make their worlds merge is actually very believable in this book. I usually find the trope of like, oh, we want to be together, but we simply cannot because our lives are too different, is usually just hogwash. It usually is not that deep. But in this book, it was that deep. It was understandable because they're both prominent figures in the worlds that they live in. I mean, he's a gosh darn mayor. His family founded the town. And Alexis is a part of a medical dynasty that she cannot just walk away without huge repercussions to not only herself, but to a large swath of people that she's never even met because of her connections to the medical world. So it's understandable. Everything that happens in this book is understandable, in my opinion. One of my favorite things about this book is the way that the people in the small town where our main character Daniel lives, the way that the townies all care for each other. It's such a small town that it's not even legally considered a town. It's considered a village because there are so few people there. And let me tell you, they care for each other in the most wholesome, heartwarming ways. In ways that make you feel sad that you don't also live in a community like this. Like, this is community care. This is what we need as humans, are the types of relationships that are shared by these characters in this village. Not only is it great just to see the townies for who they are as characters in and of themselves, but they also give us a great insight into who our main characters are as well. Not only do we get to know our two main love interests through their own points of view, but we get to see who they are as people by the way that the people around them talk to them and talk about them. Several types of relational abuse are very big themes in this book. Throughout the entire thing, we get representations of abuse, psychological and physical, in romantic relationships, and we also get representation of psychological abuse within familial structures. That is a big thing that our main girl Alexis deals with throughout this entire book. Along with some other side characters, they also deal with it. And through these characters who deal with these different kinds of abuse, we also get to see how those kinds of treatment impact how a person thinks and operates inside of relationships, romantic and otherwise. And so those are very strong, important themes in this book, along with the themes of class disparities and how it affects healthcare, how the rich are just out of touch with the world in general. But it also has themes about how healthy relationships, romantic and otherwise, shouldn't detract from your life, but actually help you to become the person that you ultimately want to be. So this really is a book about comparing and contrasting unhealthy relationships with healthy relationships. And I think it was handled very well. And it was also not boring. Because there were a lot of relational dynamics going on between the townspeople, between our main couple, between our couple and the different people in their lives. It was juicy. It was juicy on the relationship aspects. At the end, I was kind of rolling my eyes because, classic third act breakup happens, again for understandable reasons, but we start to get into the whole, oh my god, how can I ever live without them kind of thought spirals that I think are toxic, and like, people live without the people that they love all the time. It's like, deal with it like the rest of us. But I understand, okay? I understand this is fiction. It's supposed to be a love story, and like, I know that's part of it. That's just kind of a personal gripe that I have with the genre as a whole, but it was in this, and that was the only time during this book where I was like rolling my eyes and being like, okay, get a grip. But other than a couple chapters at the end, like, we're good, we're solid. I don't know what that was, but did you hear that crack? That was my wrist. Ugh. And the award for the best picture book, not only because it was the only picture book that I read this month, but just because it was the best in general, goes to A Cat from Our World and the Forgotten Witch. Oh, this is a manga about, well, an elderly forgotten witch. She used to be a hero of her world. She saved her world once upon a time, but then she got old. And the world forgot about her. And not only did it forget about her, but then it shunned her. And then came a circumstances where she was in danger and she realized she needed to try with all of her might to summon a guardian beast to protect her in her old age. And what did she summon? None other than a giant cat. But actually, this isn't a giant cat. This is a normal human-sized cat that was summoned to this magical realm. So she's actually itty-bitty. So not only is she an elderly witch, but she's a little guy. She's just a little guy. And this is a regular house cat. He's just a cat, you know? He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't understand why he can't have his regular kibbles and why he has to eat bat wings and eyeballs and slug tails. He doesn't understand why he's here. He doesn't understand why this woman, who looks so much like his old owner in his human world life, doesn't want to pet him or doesn't seem to understand him as a creature. Because in her world, in the witch's world, they don't have cats. This is a completely new being to her. So she's trying to understand him. He's trying to understand her. And of course, they can't speak to each other. And it's misunderstandings. Interspecies misunderstandings. But by the end of this, they certainly find their way to coexist. And they finally start understanding each other. It's heartbreaking. It's heartwarming. And when they do finally start understanding their roles in each other's lives, oh, it is satisfying. It is satisfying because they get to kick ass together. Yeah. I love this. It was just what I needed. I needed a heartwarming story of an old lady and a cat. Who doesn't need a story like that? Like, come on. Oh, I loved it. It was so simple. I have to show you this. You don't understand. She lives in a tree, guys. She lives in a tree in the forest. And you're probably wondering, well, how does a cat that looks like a giant in this realm live successfully within a tree in a tiny realm? It is a struggle. Oh, it's so cute and sweet and simple, but it has deeper themes of grief and loss and longing and the way that elders are mistreated in society. I cannot wait to continue the series. I have the second one on deck, and you best believe I will be reading it in July. Stellar old lady story. Add it to the collection. I do want to start off by saying the last book that I read this month was not a bad book. And honestly, after reading almost 1,200 pages of romance, it was a breath of fresh air just by not being a romance. The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. In a nutshell, this book is about a retired pirate. She's in her 40s, she has a family, and she gets called upon to go on one last adventure to save the granddaughter of a rich woman. And so she embarks on this by getting her old band back together for one last chance at glory. That's the setup for this book. The main themes of this book are motherhood and if and how you can protect your individuality despite parenthood. This is a New York Times bestseller, and I do understand why. It's because this is a very accessible fantasy, especially for people who maybe have never read fantasy before or who don't read a lot of it. It is easy to understand. There's nothing complicated about it. There are some words that if you live in the West, you're probably not too familiar with, because this is in an Arabic setting, which I think is one of its strengths. However, what makes it so accessible and what makes it so that I understand why it's a New York Times bestseller means that I didn't particularly enjoy it. This story is very on the rails. Nothing is a surprise. It telegraphs everything that's going to happen and all of the plot twists from sometimes hundreds of pages before, so when those scenes come up, you know how they're going to end already. There's never a moment in this book where I worried about if our heroes were going to save the day or not. There was no tension. That tension of not knowing what was going to happen just wasn't present in this book. And I think one of the reasons for that is the format of this book, which is told in a kind of interview style. So a scribe is interviewing Amina Al-Sirafi and the adventure that is told in this book. So you know right off the get that she survives and everything is fine. I think that was a big drawback in this story. I think it really took away opportunities for that tension, for that unknowing. I was kind of just bored. I was sailing through it. But I think one of the best things about epic high fantasy is the connection between the characters. You know, in my opinion, the side characters in stories like this are just as important, if not more so, than the main character, because the side characters give you a glimpse into who the main character is, especially in a book like this where it's being told from the first person point of view of the hero of the story. We got the potential for interesting side characters, but those relationships were never fully fleshed out. And that was so disappointing, especially because one of the side characters was the character that I enjoyed the most and I connected with the most. Unsurprising, since she was very autistic coded, so wow, shocker. I liked the autistic coded character. And there were genuine touching moments between that character and our main character, Amina, but that was about it. We have 4 main characters, the 4 main crew of this book, and their connections are not adequately explored. Even though the funniest bits of this book were the interactions between the crew, because they had fairly good chemistry, it was just left sitting on the page and it wasn't expounded upon very well. Also, this book doesn't let you sit with anything. It lays out exactly what it means, and it doesn't let you come to your own conclusions, which is another thing that makes it very accessible, especially to non-fantasy readers. But it was just very unsatisfying to have everything laid out for you and to not be allowed to sit in the themes and simmer in questions, because there was no questioning in this book. For example, even if there was some kind of conflict, it was solved paragraphs later. If there was some kind of hardship that the crew came up against, there was a solution to it, usually within the same chapter. Another disappointing factor of this was that you would think from a pirate adventure you would get a lot of time on a ship. But we don't get time on it. We don't get to live on it. We don't get to experience the ship. It's such a wasted set piece, in my opinion. So you're not part of these worlds in any significant way. You're not in these environments. You're not feeling them. You're not seeing them. You're not smelling them. There's no sensory experience in this book because there was such a lack of skill when it came to that. A fantasy like this, you want to be in it. You want to be living alongside these people. You want to be experiencing the things that they're experiencing. You want to be feeling their emotions. If they're hungry, you want to feel it. If they're homesick, you want to be able to connect with that. But that was a huge piece that was missing from this, and I think that is why it felt so lackluster to me. There was also a strange and kind of forced trans representation in this book, which I thought was not well executed and just kind of made me go, okay. And personally, I feel like I would rather have no representation than half-baked, what? Why is this here kind of representation? That was a huge bummer. This just was very lackluster and disappointing. So in June, I read 11 books, and that equates to about 3,811 pages. And I'm still a dummy. Anyway. Rapid fire genre Rex. Cozy murder mystery. Cold Clay. Picture book. Cat from Our World and the Forgotten Witch. Also, fantasy recommendation? A Cat from Our World and the Forgotten Witch. romance recommendation, Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Literary fiction character study recommendation, Woman Eating. Finally, horror recommendation, Rotten Tommy. And there we have it. My recommendations, my passes, and my yes. I am glad to be in a new month with a new stack of perspectives in front of me. I've probably talked more than enough in this video. I've been talking all month about these books. Thanks for listening. See you sometime.